Kentucky guard Andrew Harrison apologized early Sunday morning for uttering an obscenity and a racial slur about Wisconsin's Frank Kaminsky. A live microphone captured Harrison's comment when teammate Karl Anthony Towns was asked about Kaminsky during Saturday night's post-game news conference. After Wisconsin's victory over the Wildcats, Harrison also phoned Kaminsky and said that the two of them had a, quote, good conversation, and he wished Kaminsky good luck in Monday night's championship game against Duke. Harrison issued the following apology on Twitter. First, I want to apologize for my poor choice of words used in jest towards a player I respect and know. When I realized how this could be perceived, I immediately called Big Frank to apologize and let him know I didn't mean any disrespect. We had a good conversation, and I wished him good luck in the championship game Monday. Frank Kaminsky, and Bo Ryan both asked about what, in fact, Harrison said. They said they talked, they moved on, they're focused on tonight's game. Stephen A., your reaction to what Harrison had to say?
Well, first of all, I thought it was obviously something that was incendiary and inflammatory and very, very foolish for him to say. That's number one. He did the right thing by immediately apologizing on Twitter, picking up the phone and calling Frank Kaminsky and explaining himself. I also want to applaud Mr. Kaminsky and Coach Bo Ryan for how they conducted themselves and how they responded to the apology, and they're moving forward. They've got a national championship to win. They don't need to be preoccupied with something like this. What came across to me more than anything else was Harrison was being a sore loser. Everything was fine when they were 38-0. But now that they're 38-1 and they lost an opportunity to win a national championship, it's a bit of sour grapes, and that was his initial reaction. Clearly, the word that he used, the racial epithet, obviously we live in a society where our level of sensitivity is heightened significantly, and that's not something that you should be doing. But I also feel the need and an obligation to point out that if you are a young African-American male, it is something that is said all the time. It is something that is communicated amongst one another all the time. And that it is something that, while it needs to be eradicated from our vernacular, is something that repeatedly gets stated, and it is not meant in the context that an African American would embrace it or inhale it as if it were coming from someone white. Now, I understand that there are a lot of people in America that are a bit put off about that. They are a bit offended by that notion. What I would implore everybody to do is to get over that. That is a reality that you're never going to escape from an historical perspective, and we understand why the word is so heinous, why it's the worst word in the history of language, according to you, Skip Bayless. We understand why that is. We know what the N-word is associated with from an historical perspective, and without even getting into the specifics, we also know who made the word heinous and why that is. So if it were somebody white that was willing to articulate and elocute the N-word towards someone black, it would be embraced, inhaled, and taken in an entirely different context than it is coming from a black individual, particularly when you're an African American, and we've got young African Americans out here communicating while using that word all the time. It's not to excuse it. A gentleman by the name of John Wooten, for example, Skip, he and I have had our differences on this issue in the past, but we do not disagree on the fact that it needs to be completely eliminated from the American lexicon. We understand that. But the reality is that there are a lot of young African American males that use that word religiously, and this was just another example. I mean, him using the N-word, it could have easily been replaced with bleep that MFer, okay? Yep. Because that's the context in which he meant it. That's what I took from it. We need to understand that. Let him know that you can't do that you shouldn't be doing that you were wrong. But we need to also understand and appreciate the fact that it would have been entirely different if somebody white had said that about Harrison or a black player. That's just the reality.
We're on the same page here. I'm trying to keep this in context, and I personally, and this is my 2 cents, I did not consider this a big deal. I considered this a kid, a 20-year-old, who had just had his emotions crushed, his undefeated emotions, and trust me, he knew in his heart of hearts he was maybe primarily responsible as the point guard for their collapse down the stretch. So he's sitting at the dais with the mic on, but he's trying to speak under his breath, and He's hurt, and he's angry, and he's extremely frustrated. And the question is going to require Karl Anthony Towns, sitting, I think, to his right, to give a complimentary answer about how great Kaminsky played. So he tries to mutter or utter something this way that he does not think is going to get picked up, and it was barely audible. I'm still not sure, but I get it, because he apologized for it, so he knew that validated that he said something he knew he should not have said. But he said it, and then he leaped to Twitter to apologize profusely for it. Good for him. And he called Kaminsky, an acquaintance of his, to say, hey, whatever, put it in the context of, I didn't mean it this way or that way. Now, again, this is my 2 cents as a white guy. I don't consider that word a racial slur. I'm sorry, I don't, for all the reasons we've talked about many, many times on this show. You can go to epithet, I get that. I don't think he should have uttered that in an NCAA press conference setting moments after a game. I personally found the first word he used in the public context much worse than the second word. That's just me. If you're going to use the F word publicly, that's completely out of bounds for a college kid, and he knows that. The other word, again, you and I have talked about this repeatedly on this show. We've had Michael Eric Dyson on, the Georgetown professor, the author, the commentator. I communicated with Michael Eric Dyson last night, and he continues to remind me that some in the black community, even though there's a split on this, have, to quote Michael, hijacked that word, drained the poison from that N-word that ended with the hard ER, which I've told you is the most evil word in the history of our language. But the black community, some, drained it of its poison and made it, in certain cases, a term of black-to-black endearment, and then in certain cases, just sort of a catch-all word. As Michael Eric said last night, he could have used the word dude in place of that word, and it would have been the same thing to the kid.
Sure.
Now, do I know what's in the kid's heart? I don't. And on face value, just at a glance, we do have a black player using that word ending in A about the white leader of a team that starts 4 white players. So at a glance, to your point, Stephen A., I'm sure some white people sat back like, wow, that seems a little out of bounds. I don't think it was, because I don't consider it a black to white racial slur. I want to caution the white kids. Please don't get the idea that means it's okay for you to use that word back to black kids, because it's not. And as Michael Eric Dyson always says, when's the best time to use that? When's the only time? Never. Yeah. You can never use that word that way. So I want to drive home that point, because some people are going to be a little mixed up about, wait a minute, well, what does this all mean? It gets a little murky. But I think it just spilled out of his mouth, and he apologized for it, and Kaminsky clearly accepted the apology. I'm sure he's heard the word quite a few times, and moved on. So no big deal, but I'm happy we could have this conversation to sort of put it in our perspective.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think Frank Kaminsky, and Stephen A., this is for you too, do you think Frank Kaminsky, the reason why it wasn't a big deal with Frank Kaminsky, because he got it. He knew where Andrew Harrison was coming from. You called him, quote unquote, he was being a sore loser, so to speak. Do you feel as if Kaminsky knew that?
I don't know, because I don't know Kaminsky at all. I've never even met him, so I can't dare to speculate. I'd surmise that he may have understood it, but at the same time, you just never know. All I'm saying is that I think, Skip, to piggyback off to your point, when Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, who I know and respect, and obviously yourself and so many others, and we've had this conversation, I think the important point to get out of all of this is that it's not just about eradicating the word, it's why it's important to eradicate the word. It's important because even though black folks talk to ourselves, we talk amongst one another, and sometimes we use the word. I've used the word in the past. Obviously, Mike Wilbon, we did a special for ESPN. He articulated how he does, how so many guys do. All of us as individuals who are black, when we get together, sometimes that word gets spewed. There's no question about that. But the reason why You've got the Dr. Michael Eric Dysons, myself, and so many others who have sort of, just transformed our mode of thinking to some degree, for lack of a better phraseology or word, is simply because we understand that now people outside of the black community are looking at that as an excuse to think for 1 second that they could use that word, particularly when they address us. And I'm here to tell you that is not going to fly. Not just with me, not just with a Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, but if you think for 1 second some young white kid can go in a black neighborhood and he can spew that word, I got news for you. It's going to be a problem. And so as a result of it, you just want to make sure that you disseminate the message that, again, one of the biggest reasons, no matter what level of term of endearment or whatever excuse we want to use for using the word, the reason why our mode of thinking needs to change in that regard is simply because you don't want people outside of the black community thinking it's okay for them to use it, because it will not be.
Last quick point. Here's where I'm not going to give this young man a pass. I do think that even out of frustration that Andrew Harrison was being, to a fault, dismissive and disrespectful of Frank Kaminsky's game, just of his game. And again, sore loser, however you... It's just out of bounds. It's just the wrong... You talked about how they, for the first time all year, showed little to no class, maybe with lack of pregame and postgame handshakes. Well, there it was. There was the big exclamation point on no class, was taking that kind of shot at Kaminsky's game, even though did he really mean it in his heart of hearts?
No.
Who knows? I think so.
Who knows, right? Just a sore loser. All right, let's leave it there, guys. When we come back, Phillip Rivers to the Titans. That's a question mark. We're hearing some rumors about it. Wow is right. Our NFL analyst, Teddy Bruschi, will join us to weigh in. We'll be right back in just a few moments, everyone.